I am very excited to be here with you all today. I know many of you have seen us do budget presentations, and fortunately, yet again, we got through a General Assembly session without major changes. So this is the couple of years in a row now where we've had some pretty good stability. So some of this is going to be repetitive from what you've seen before. Because of that, I'm going to apologize up front, and I'm going to take an approach on a few different slides of maybe being a little bit more blunt, let's really make sure we don't do this. Just trying to highlight for you all where we have seen errors in the last couple of years, not trying to call anyone out in particular, but if we can really just be open and honest and say, this has been a problem, let's avoid it. So with that, jump in. Oops. Of course. What do I do now? There we go. All right, agenda then. We are going to go through a status update for 2014, and my guess is you've already received most of the status update this morning. Then we are going to talk about 2015 budgets, a lot of different things that we're going to cover with that. I do also want to mention to you all the pilot program that is going into place this year. And then lastly, we're going to talk about protected taxes as somewhat of a follow-up to the presentations that we did last fall on protected taxes. Let's see if this works. All right. So 2014 status update. From me, I just want to say thank you. I'm sure you all heard this morning, we're at 92 counties billing on time. That is thanks to you all and the work that you do with your county unit, with your taxing units. I know many of you go above and beyond with your taxing units in terms of keeping them on track, allowing them to come into your office, use your copier, your scanners, things like that. Even for some of you, you're uploading documents on behalf of your taxing units. And so just from me, I just really want to take a minute and say thank you. Your work got us here to where we are today. So thank you very much. All right, now 2015. I know many of you are already starting to talk about 2015. And I think some of you are already starting to have some department meetings to track, get your departments prepared for their 2015 budgets as well. So first, before we get too far into that, we're going to start with where we stand and some of the other steps that we've already taken to work towards 2015 budgets. So first, we do have March 31st. That is the sales data submission to the department, specifically to our data division. This is the first step in on-time billing. We need to make sure we can review the sales, all of your sales disclosures, check for valid sales, and then this information will ultimately be used for our ratio study review, which our assessment division is currently in our ratio study review period. While there is not an official statutory due date for submission of the ratio study, we do have a recommended date of May 1st. Obviously, we're past that date. We have been getting quite a few ratio studies. We get a number of them in every single week. We are experiencing very quick turnaround on all of those. So if your particular county has not yet submitted, I highly encourage you to talk to your assessor and see if we can get you on in sooner rather than later. The sooner you can submit that ratio study, the sooner it will be back to you. So certainly whatever we can do to get those sooner. That will help then for this deadline here that's on the bottom, this July 1st deadline, as you all are very well aware of that deadline. That would be the deadline for your roll of assessed values from your assessor over to you all. But before that, we do have June 30th, and June 30th is the close of the first half of 2014, and it really is the numeric starting point for the 2015 budgets. That is going to be a pretty key, there's some data from June 30th that is very key information for our purposes as we start to work budgets. Specifically, it's the June 30 cash balances. that will start to form our basis for what type of revenues you have available, what type of cash you have available to fund your 2015 budgets. After June 30th, that is an opportunity where you really can start to get into Gateway and start to fill in a lot more information on Gateway, specifically the current year financial worksheet. Once you've passed June 30th, you should have all of the information you need in order to be able to go in and start to complete that. Even prior to June 30th, you can be going in even now and working on your Form 1s, Form 2s. Again, I'm sure Commissioner Vincent mentioned this morning that Gateway did open officially yesterday. So it is open and accessible for you all to get in and start to work in there if you already have information that you know you need to be inputting. Next, we have the July 15th deadline for your redevelopment commissions. Obviously, if you have a county redevelopment commission, this is something that you specifically are going to want to be paying attention to. But even if you do not have a county redevelopment commission, you're going to want to make sure that any redevelopment commissions that you do have in your county are completing this process. They do need to go through a process to file with you a letter that indicates whether or not they have any excess assessed value that can be released to the other taxing units. In terms of what we call that, we really use two different names. First, TIF pass-through is the way that you often will see it, and the way we often talk about it is called TIF pass-through, or also the assessed value of TIF that's released. As you receive those letters, we also do ask that you provide us with copies of those when you do your certifications. This is information that you put on your certificate of net assessed value to show us where assessed value has been released. And it ultimately does impact certain calculations that the department will do. And so it is very important to make sure that as you've received these letters and a redevelopment commission chooses to release assessed value, that we are ensuring that we're capturing that correctly on the certificate of net assessed value. So if you have any questions on that process, if you've never had this before and you get a letter that says yes, they want to release, you can certainly reach out to us and we are happy to help kind of walk through that process and what you need to do. Also, in addition to the July 15th letter that you'll receive, there are the TIF neutralizations. Those are, again, your responsibility to complete those and file those with us. I know many of you use different processes for getting those completed. I'm very happy to say that last year's change with that form, in that particular form, we received a lot of good feedback on that change. And from a numbers standpoint, it really did work the way that we expected it to. It helped us to reduce the amount of base assessed value that was being kind of siphoned away to the TIF districts. So we're very happy with the change in that form. We are currently in a process where we are further evaluating that form. I do not anticipate any major changes to it, but if you have any comments on it or questions about it, now is a great time to get in touch either with myself or with Dan Jones, our Assistant Budget Director. While I don't think we'll probably have too many changes on our neutralization worksheet, one thing that we are targeting to do would be to put out a frequently asked questions about the TIF neutralizations. So even if you have something like that you would want us to address in that type of memo, reach out to us now so we can make sure that we include it. One other thing with these TIF neutralizations, and this is where I'm going to start to get a little more blunt. When you get that signed piece of paper back from us, or you get that in email back from us and you have the commissioner's signature on there, the next immediate step that you need to do is to take that factor that's calculated on the worksheet and make sure you apply it in your software system. Unfortunately, over the years, we've had some counties where those factors are not necessarily being applied as they should be. So that piece of paper is not the final step. Your real final step is typing that factor into your tax and bill system and readjusting all of your base values for that factor. So if you have questions on that particular process, you will want to reach out to your vendor. They will be able to help you with that. All right, next we have the August 1st deadline for your Certificate of Net Assessed Value, or CNAV. This is being done through Gateway, as we have done the last couple of years. We do not have any major changes coming to CNAV for this year. So what you have seen in the past is what you will see again. We are working with your software vendors to develop some capabilities to provide a little bit more detailed CNAV in the future. And actually, your tax and bill vendors are currently going through a certification process on that. But we are not ready to pull the trigger on it, and before we do that, we will have a lot of outreach to you all to make sure you understand what we're doing and why we are doing it. Fortunately, by working with your software vendors, we would be taking it largely to just an upload that you would need to do into Gateway, so significantly cut down on the amount of data entry that you need to do. Even though we would be actually be getting more data from you, all you would have to do is do one upload in order to populate all of it. The other note I have here is that the CNAV and the submission of your CNAV does generally dictate what order we will conduct your budget review in. Now, this isn't perfect, but by budget field representative, the way we initially set our prioritization on completing our budget reviews is by the date that the CNAV was submitted. Now, you may see, and particularly this last year, what you may have seen is that we did not always follow that, and some of that was also dictated by when units actually submitted all of their information in Gateway. I was very proud of the department this past year. We were able to finally get to the point where we have a little bit more real-time access into Gateway. And so if we actually reached a spot where, as of mid-October, all of the taxing units in a county had already submitted, we were able to start work. So unlike in years past, we started our budget reviews on October 16th last year. That's 3 to 4 weeks earlier than when we had been able to submit it in the past, or start our reviews in the past. So as much as possible, we will follow your CNAV submission dates, but in certain instances, we might have to make some adjustments based on available information. All right, prior to August 1st, or prior to submitting your net assessed values, you do need to determine your assessed value withholding that you would like to withhold. You can withhold up to 2% in each of your taxing districts. If you do want to withhold more than 2% because you know of some large pending appeals or something along those lines, you do need to come to the department for advance approval of that. One thing with this particular process, when we receive those letters from you all saying you want to withhold a certain amount, we evaluate those, see why you're withholding those. So as much detail as you can give to us as to why you want to do that extra withholding, that would be greatly appreciated. For my purposes, an additional step that I would like to start to take this year is to then also compare this information to the final net assessed value that is submitted. As we move to a more detailed CNAV, we're actually going to start to capture your withholding amount. So that is a piece of data that we're going to start to grab, hopefully for Pay 16. But even here in Pay 15, once you've received approval from us to withhold a little bit more, we are going to be going back, double checking through those taxing districts where you had that approval, making sure everything is in line. So just kind of as a heads up, making sure that those additional withholdings that were approved are being applied correctly. All right, next we get into the really fun stuff. Really, September and October, those are the two incredibly busy months for budget purposes. So first we have September 2nd, and this is a deadline. This actually has multiple levels on this date. The first item that is on September 2nd is that this is the deadline for taxing units to submit their non-binding review form to you, or your county council review form. That is something that does occur on Gateway, and it will continue to be on Gateway this year. So hopefully you all found that to be helpful, to be able to export that out in either Excel or PDF, make that information a little more easily available to your county council members. In addition to the non-binding reviews, September 2nd is also the date where any unit that has to go through binding adoption, this is the day that they have to finish their work in Gateway. And at that point, they are submitting it to the fiscal body that will ultimately do the adoption. So after September 2nd, for example, if you do a binding adoption for your solid waste district, up until September 2nd, your solid waste district has the ability to go in and edit the information in Gateway. After September 2nd, they convert over to read-only, and at that point, it would only be the county's responsibility in terms of editing any information and ultimately submitting it. For this particular deadline, it is the taxing unit's responsibility to ensure that they are completing these requirements. If September 2nd passes and somebody has not submitted their county council review form, that will be on that taxing unit for failure to submit that form to you. All right, the next deadline then is September 13th. And this is kind of the last possible day to complete this particular item. This item is the last day to publish your first notice of your proposed budgets levies, or basically your Form 3 or notice to taxpayers. We say that this is your last possible day because it also does have to be done at least 10 days prior to your public hearing. So if you are holding your public hearing earlier, then you need to ensure that you have properly published this particular notice in the newspaper at least 10 days prior to your public hearing. Many of you have probably heard already, but this is the last year for newspaper publications. So we do have kind of a dual process that we're going to be going through this year, but just this year in particular, you know, let's make sure that we're hitting all of our appropriate deadlines with these newspapers. If you are performing a binding adoption for a taxing unit, you are also responsible for ensuring that their notice is published. This is really, really important to remember. And unfortunately, year over year, we have 1 or 2 units that do experience this particular issue. So, you know, if you have a solid waste district or a fire district or somebody that you're doing an adoption for, it is your responsibility to make sure it's done correctly. If it is not done correctly, both the county and the taxing unit will end up being penalized for it. So it's highly important for you to make sure it's right. In addition to these newspaper publications, hold on for a second. Take this off. I don't feel very well. I don't feel very well today, so we're getting through this. Okay, in addition to the newspaper advertisements, we do have something that is new this year, officially, statutorily new this year. And this is your submission of your Form 3 on Gateway. Years past, what you have heard from us is that we recommend that you submit your Form 3 prior to your public hearing, and then, like last year, we made those publicly available to people in advance of the public hearings. This year, it's a statutory requirement. So the timing on this particular notice is that, again, it does need to be submitted on Gateway at least 10 days prior to your public hearing, or at the latest, September 13th. So again, really the best way to think about this is the day that you take that newspaper advertisement, assuming that you're doing your newspaper advertisement on the correct days, but the day that you take that to the newspaper, also go into Gateway and submit this. We will talk a little bit later about online ads and what we're going to be doing with this particular information. so I won't jump into that too much just yet, but really, really important. The other thing to keep in mind is that this is going to be involved in our determination of whether or not you have met your proper advertising responsibilities. So when we are doing our budget reviews, if you have not properly submitted in Gateway by the required time frame, you will be penalized. So as we get closer to it, I am sure you will be seeing more information from the department, more reminders from us, but just really keep in mind this is required this year. All right, then we go to September 20th. This is your last day for your second publication. This is in the newspaper again. Because you have already submitted on Gateway, that information is already publicly available. If your taxpayers want to go out to the web page at 2 a.m., they are welcome to do so, and they can pull up a copy of your Form 3 and see the information that you submitted. But for the purposes of the newspaper, we do still have that second advertisement as we've had in the past. In addition to September 20th being the official deadline for this notice, it also does need to be done at least 7 days after your first notice and at least 3 days prior to your public hearing. So there are a lot of different boxes to check on making sure those newspaper publications are done correctly. If you do start to experience an issue with this, if you have started the process early enough, you may be able to work with your newspaper to adjust your publications and make sure that you're meeting the appropriate time frames. So if you start to encounter problems, reach out to us. After these deadlines, September 30th and September 20th, or September 13th and September 20th, our hands are tied. So if you've started early enough, we might be able to find a way to work around these things. But once we reach September 20th, if that second ad has not run yet, we don't really have many options at that point. All right, then we have October 1st. This is your last day for your county fiscal body to complete your non-binding recommendations, your review and recommendations for your taxing units. There are a couple of things here that I want to point out. And actually, I'll just do it here. I think the slides are later. But for this particular process, you will most likely receive some information both from schools and from non-school units. For the non-school units, you do need to go all the way through the process and provide an official recommendation, or the council needs to provide an official recommendation. So really work with your council to make sure that they are making a recommendation as to what they would like to see for each taxing unit's budgets and levies and rates for 2015. For schools, statute only requires a review of the school's levies and rates. One thing that every year we have a couple of counties get tripped up on this. Because it is a review, it is much harder for us to verify that you have done that. So in your minutes, make it very explicit that you have reviewed the school's levies and rates. There's not going to necessarily be a piece of paper that says, here's what we said, here's what we recommended, but we need to be able to see that you did complete this process. Unfortunately, if you don't complete your review of the schools, or if we can't verify that that occurred, then we may have to penalize the county unit because of it. So just make it very clear in your minutes that this has been done. All right. Then we go to, this is actually the date, I have it listed up here as October 22nd. I really think it's October 24th this year. This is not a statutory date, but it works off of our final budget adoption date. And with the way the weekends fall this year, the budget adoption date is November 3rd. And so if we work back the 10 days, this really should be October 24th. So October 24th will be the last possible day for you to hold your public hearing on your 2015 budget. This does have to be done at least 10 days prior to your adoption. This also applies for any units that you are doing your binding adoption for. And again, just as you are doing these binding adoptions, make sure you are documenting it in the same way that you document your own budget adoption process. If there is ever any question, were the steps followed properly, we're going to come back to you. We're going to ask first and foremost for your minutes. And assuming everything is documented appropriately in your minutes, that should provide us with what we need to be able to say, yes, this process was completed correctly. All right, then we do get to November 3rd. That is your last possible day for your budget adoption. We say last possible day. I highly encourage you to do this earlier. As I said, the earlier units in a county complete this process, the earlier we can actually start our process. The other benefit of doing this earlier is that if there is a problem, we have time to fix it. What we have seen with Gateway is we modified the process for everyone. And so every year we do have at least some units that have to go back through and do what we've been calling more of a technical correction. Maybe they didn't fill out their Form 4 correctly. Maybe not everybody signed the Form 4 or said yes, marked off their yes or their no's. So there is a technical correction process we can go through. But ideally, if we can complete that prior to November 3rd, that's better. We have some flexibility to complete it during our budget review, but that may then ultimately result in some further delays on the budget review being completed. So if you have finished your work at the start of October, you've submitted everything in Gateway, our field reps at that point in time, they have a way to actually see what information, what forms are submitted by each taxing unit on a daily basis. And so they are going through the process of checking those Form 4s in particular as they are received to make sure that there are no issues. If they do see an issue, as much as possible, we will reach out to you and work through that process to see if we can correct it. Once you have done your budget adoption, we do advise everyone to submit their budget forms in Gateway at least or within 2 days after your budget adoption. And again, if your field rep sees that your budget adoption was supposed to be on October 1st and it's October 10th and you haven't submitted yet, you're probably going to get a message from the field rep to say, what's going on? Let's get this in and done. All right. Next, just want to touch on online ads because this is a little different. We're very excited about online ads because of the benefit that the taxpayers will see. Really excited that they are going to have this information and be able to access it really whenever they want, more of an on-demand type level of access. The only way that this works is for you all to complete this process appropriately, and also for your taxing units to complete this appropriately. So especially this first year, we really are going to provide a lot of guidance, and hopefully we can knock this out of the park, and we can all see the true benefit of moving towards these online ads. So as I mentioned, each taxing unit will be responsible for submitting their Form 3 on Gateway at least 10 days prior to their public hearing. In addition to that, you as the county unit, you have an additional responsibility. There is going to be a separate form or a separate notice that we provide to you that we will be asking you to run in your local newspapers. That particular notice is going to advise taxpayers about the online site. Tell them that this information is available on an online site. It also is going to include a phone number where any taxpayer who may not have internet access, they will be able to call the department and we will print out whatever Form 3s they need and we will mail those directly to them so that even though they don't have web access, they can still have that information. You are responsible for getting this published. Statute does allow you the opportunity to collect money back from the taxing units for the expense of running this advertisement if you so choose. We will have additional guidance on this going forward. I believe what we are targeting right now, and Commissioner Vincent may have mentioned this morning, but what we're targeting is that you would run this advertisement once towards the start of August and once at the start of September, because that really will tackle the main time frames when those budget advertisements are showing up in the newspaper. In addition to providing that particular notice and additional guidance on what all you need to do with that, the department is also working on a very large outreach effort for online ads. One of the things we are going to be doing is putting together basically a, quote, press kit, and we will make that publicly available to all the taxing units. It's just going to be some flyers, brochures, things like that that you can make available. Maybe you have a bulletin board in the county or in your county courthouse that you can post. That you'll have then an official flyer that says budget notices can also be found at this address. So we will be doing a lot of outreach with that. We will be reaching out to all of the local media. We've got some other outreach planned around the State House to try to get the word out to more and more taxpayers that these online ads are available and accessible for everybody to review. All right, county review. This is jumping into the non-binding and the binding adoptions. We've already talked about a little bit of this, so if we've already hit it, I'll kind of gloss over it. But here's what to expect. We have not had any changes statutorily in terms of what units would be going through this process. So the same rules that applied last year are the same rules that apply this year. So in terms of who you should expect to receive non-binding review forms, it's going to be any taxing unit that has an elected fiscal body. So your townships, your cities, towns, most of your school corporations, but not all. I believe we have 13 in the state that have an appointed board. And then libraries, while libraries have an appointed board, if they are keeping their budget less than the assessed value growth quotient, or their growth in their budget less than the assessed value growth quotient, then they will go through the non-binding review process. If they try to grow their budget more than the assessed value growth quotient, then that will push them into a binding adoption process. At this point, we do not yet know what the assessed value growth quotient is. That information should come from State Budget Agency towards the end of June. So be on the lookout for that. As we have it, they send it over to us and then we blast it out on our listserv. So that's going to be your quickest way to get the official numbers. The other thing with the libraries on that assessed value growth quotient is that it is the statewide growth quotient. It is not the county growth quotients that will be provided. There's always a lot of confusion as to which growth quotient we use. Really, the county growth quotient, we do not use that in any formulas. So that particular number is an informational number for your non-binding review process. We always, anytime we're looking to apply a growth quotient, it will always be the statewide number. So just keep that in mind. For the units, they will be providing different information depending on if they're a school or non-school. So non-schools will provide their proposed budgets, levies, and rates. Schools will only provide their levies and rates. And then we've already talked about this a little bit, but for your county council, for non-school units, the big key here is you do have to do the recommendation. Statute does include a list of different things that the county council should be comparing each unit to. So we have comparison to the assessed value growth quotient, both the statewide growth quotient, and then just for comparison, your county growth quotient. And then also comparison to other units in your county and how their budgets and levies and rates may be growing or decreasing, and kind of seeing where each unit falls in line with that. For schools, I already kind of said this one. No recommendation is required, but document that you did the review. Big thing. If the taxing unit does not file the paperwork with you or does not file on Gateway their county council review worksheet, they will be looking to have, or we will be looking to continue their budgets and levies from 2014 into 2015. And we have a similar penalty over on the county side. If your county council fails to complete this process by October 1st, then we would be looking to continue your 2014 budgets and levies into 2015. On the binding adoption, we've got any taxing unit that has an appointed board, other than certain libraries that keep their budget growth at a lower level, but all of your solid waste districts, your fire districts, they will all be coming in through that binding adoption process. And then if you do have a library that does choose to increase their budget over the assessed value growth quotient, then they should be going through a binding adoption process. For these units that have to go through binding adoption, it really is their responsibility to determine the appropriate body that they go to. Especially with libraries, it can get a little dicey sometimes as to whether they go to the county, whether they go to a city or town. So we have always put that onus back on the unit that has to go through binding adoption. They may be looking to you all for some guidance or some information on it, but it is their responsibility to figure out where they should be going. I know at our time when we do our budget workshops in the summertime, if we do identify that there is a library that will be going to binding adoption, we always try to take that opportunity to notify either the county or the city or town that's going to be impacted. So you at least have the heads up, but that is officially the taxing unit's responsibility to make sure you're aware that you would have those new responsibilities. If you do have to do a binding adoption, you also are responsible for their ads, as we mentioned. You also are going to be responsible for their public hearing and ultimately their final adoption. And then lastly, submitting all of the information in Gateway. All right, so like I said, all of that was pretty much the same as we've had in the past. Online ads is the only kind of new statutory requirement, and you will hear a lot more from us on online ads. Next, I want to talk about something else that is new that certain counties may choose to be involved in. This is the pilot program. This actually came out of the General Assembly, not this past session, but last year. They gave us a little bit of time to figure out how we were going to get this all done. So this year, we are starting a 3-year pilot program, and the goal of it is to try to figure out ways to improve the county council review process. I know everybody has their own personal opinion about the county council review process. I've heard many different opinions. But really, the General Assembly, I think when they put that process into place, they did have high hopes for it, particularly in a circuit breaker type world. They saw this as a way to help make units work together a little bit more and hopefully, coordinate what was going on. Not quite sure that we've seen that just yet, and so that's where this pilot program is going to kind of step in. We can have up to 3 counties included in this pilot program on an annual basis. If your county does choose to participate, there is an application process that you have to go through to officially tell us that yes, you want to be a part of this. And then we are required to select counties that have a good mix of rural and urban and population size. So we want to make sure we are looking at a variety of counties in this process. What will happen during this pilot program is that the taxing units will still submit their non-binding review form through Gateway, as they always have. There is additional information that they will also submit. Let me see. Yeah, we don't have it. All right, well, okay, so I didn't include in here the list of the additional information, but in addition to their non-binding review form, we also will be looking to get information from them on debt issuance that they may have, things that are going to be occurring that may be impacting levies. That's the other big one. There's a list that we have that each taxing unit will need to provide to us. And what we will then do is that we will take all of this information and complete almost a preliminary abstract based on that information. We will not be going through the process of actually doing our budget reviews in the month of September, but what we will do is for each unit, we will say they're proposing a levy of this that would equate to a tax rate of X, and we will sum up what the tax rates will be by taxing district. We will do some calculations to get to an estimated circuit breaker impact, assuming that those proposed levies are all adopted in the way that they were originally submitted to us. And then we will, by October 2nd, we need to provide that information to the county council so they can complete their non-binding recommendation with more information than what they typically would have. If you participate in this program, your time frames, your deadlines, a lot of the deadlines get shifted. So for example, your county council review, we have until the start of October to complete our work, and so the county council actually has until October 15th to complete their review and recommendation process. While that does not necessarily impact the county unit that much, that does impact every other taxing unit in that county because the taxing units cannot adopt their budgets until this process is completed, until the non-binding review and recommendation is completed. So as you are talking to your county council about whether or not you want to participate in this, just be aware this will shift a lot of deadlines for you, for your for your taxing units. It will actually require the county unit to provide us with information similar to the non-binding review form. That's something normally you guys don't have to do, but in this case you will have to provide us with your proposed budgets, levies, and rates in advance so that we can ensure that we factor that in. Also, if you have any cross-county units that maybe they're major in a different county, so they don't normally give information to your county council, if your county is participating in this program, they will also need to provide us with information. So there's a lot of things to consider. One other consideration in deciding whether or not you wanted to participate in this program is to take a look at when you expect to have your CNAV submitted. In order for us to really provide the best possible information for this pilot program, we would highly encourage that the county would have their CNAV submitted, ideally August 1st, but absolutely no later than September 1st. So if that's going to be hard for you to meet that type of time frame, then what ends up happening is that we have to use estimates of the assessed values, and the more estimates we build into this analysis, the less helpful our analysis will be. So if we can have official net assessed values when we're doing this, that will make everything a lot easier and a lot more informative to your county council. So we will have more information on this as we go. Ultimately, the time or the goal of this, since it does say that it's a 3-year program, this is our first year. Moving forward, once we've gone through this 1 year, we have been tasked with figuring out how can a county do this on their own without our involvement. So you will be hearing more about this pilot program over the next 3 years, and hopefully by year 2 or by year 3, maybe there's some templates or something that we can release to you all in advance so that you can do that type of more detailed analysis on your own for your county council. All right. Lastly, just want to touch on protected taxes. I know Eric Bussis and I, our former data director, we were here in October talking to you about protected taxes, and for anyone that remembers, I think I basically started off my presentation by saying there's a lot we don't know. We know more now. We do know more. Not yet to the point of wanting to roll it on out, but we will be very shortly because we don't have a choice anymore. Where we are headed with this. So yeah, first and foremost, protected taxes are being implemented. I know there was kind of some question last year, would it stay through the General Assembly session? There were some efforts to get rid of it or to modify it significantly, but for the vast majority of units, it's going into place. And so you all, in terms of the way that your systems are working, you will actually be distributing based on protected taxes. What will happen, we do have some other ways to kind of adjust that by individual taxing unit, but those will all occur post-distribution, and that's really where our guidance still needs to come out and explain what's going to happen. Just to step back for 1 second, protected taxes, the easiest way to think of that, these are taxes that are being raised by your debt service funds. And what happens is that we are not applying the 1, 2, or 3% property tax caps against your debt service funds. For anyone who has seen those circuit breaker reports we released about a month ago, you may have seen debt service funds or even exempt funds that did have a dollar amount associated with it in terms of a circuit breaker impact. That is over 65 circuit breaker. Over 65 is handled differently. It is proportional across all funds, regardless of the type of fund. So in case you had any questions from your taxing units on that, that's what that is. All right, let's see. This is just an example of what is occurring with protected taxes. So what you'll see here, we're assuming in this example that we have no over 65 circuit breaker credit. So what we have here are 4 different funds for this county unit. Some actual tax rates for what each of those funds have. And you'll see here in these first couple columns, the debt service fund accounts for 25% of the tax rate. When you move over to how we are actually distributing the circuit breaker credits, though, they take 0%. So all of the other funds are impacted to a greater extent because that debt service fund is not going to take any circuit breaker. Included with circuit breaker, or with protected taxes, there are 2 provisions that you need to be aware of. The first one is applicable for pretty much any unit, and it allows a unit to reallocate the circuit breaker loss among its unprotected funds, so all of the non-debt service funds. So we came out with those circuit breaker reports in April, and it said by fund, here's the circuit breaker amount that you're taking in each fund. A taxing unit can go through a process to reallocate the amount that they will take to each fund. So if they determine that it's more important to more fully fund their general fund than their Parks and Rec fund, they have the ability to shift the money around. This is where we will be having additional guidance to come out to say, here's how that process will occur. Where we are headed with it is that we are going to be releasing basically a form that a taxing unit will be able to fill out to say, here's where I want my circuit breaker being taken. We are going to limit it, though, to the levies that were actually adopted. So this is not an opportunity for folks to change the policy decisions that they made during the budget adoption process. So if during the budget adoption process you chose to not really fund your Parks and Rec, you will not be able to suddenly shift a bunch of money over to your Parks and Rec because you want to more fully fund that now than you did 6 months ago. Because of that, this form that we will be providing to all of the taxing units, there will be a calculation that we're currently in the process of doing that will tell them the minimum amount of circuit breaker that would have to be taken in a particular fund if we run that risk. It also does take into account the distribution of taxes or the distribution of the levies by taxing district. I know that's not as big of a deal for county units, but for example, for townships, if you have a township fire fund in one district but not in another district, we do need to keep the circuit breaker loss from that district that includes the fire fund. We need to keep it just within that one district. You can't shift it to a different, basically a different taxing base by hitting a different taxing district. So those are calculations we are actually currently completing, and we will release all of those with this form that will then tell people how to fill that out and give it to us. The other piece of this is going to then be guidance as to if you've reallocated, how that impacts your budgets. So we will have additional guidance on what that means now for your cash balance information, what that means now for your line 7, your December tax collection information. So all of that will be forthcoming. In addition, one other note, and this again does not actually directly impact you all, but you should be aware of it. There is a waiver process that schools did get through the General Assembly this past year. Essentially, if they are getting a circuit breaker hit of more than 10% of their transportation fund levy, then they can apply to us for a waiver from protected taxes. And that means once they receive their tax distribution from you all, they will move the money back around so that it's almost as though protected taxes did not happen for them. So we have additional guidance we need to provide to them on how to complete that process. We've already been issuing the certifications for those that are eligible to do it, but now we need to tell them, here's how you actually move your money, and then here again, how it impacts your 2015 budgets. Doesn't impact you, but if you do get questions from your schools, they're moving the money around after distribution. You all are not shifting the way that you distribute your money. So. All right, with that, just my contact information. If you do have questions on this information, feel free to reach out to me. I won't be around the next couple of days, so I'm going to Aruba. Kind of not good to be sick right before going, but so if you do reach out to me in a couple of days, bear with me. I'll get back to you next week. So, but you can also always reach out to Dan Jones, our Assistant Budget Director, or your field rep, and we're happy.